Yo, what up? It's Chris. All right, we live here. I'm down in DC. I hope you can see me well. Real quick, I'm going to try to keep this less than 5 minutes. And it's a reaction to a post that I wrote on Facebook. And on Facebook, I said, well, look at it. The 5% have matriculated and now become the 10%. And they're selling you snake oil and calling it money. It's gross. Knowledge, wisdom, understanding. Remember. Now, I'm not going to get into the 5% nation, the gods of earths, and your feeling about that and all the people involved. But there's something I appreciated about it. When I got to Morehouse, there were some folks who, when we were doing student group presentations, basically your first week, a bunch of different student groups present to the new freshmen. And they're like, here are the different student clubs. And you have all the various things. One of them was a guy who got up and said, peace, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and started talking about the 5%ers. Now, I never became a part of the 5%ers. I never went to the school in Harlem or in Mecca. I'm not an adherent to any of it. But I've been around a lot of people who espouse 5%er knowledge. I've been around a lot of folks who were into giving you knowledge on Clarence 13th X, but before it was on the internet, like when people had notebooks and binders full of photocopied documents and papers, talking about the 5%ers, talking about universal truth, the supreme mathematics. And I found it to be amazing that in my study of world religions, and at that time in undergrad, I was into world religion. So I tried to begin my study of Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Shintoism, Yoruba practices, Santeria, Voodoo, various metaphysical approaches and things that aren't considered religions. And when I came across 5% understanding, it was like, yo, this is fascinating. This idea that the African, the Asiatic black man is the original man, and that's a reflection of God. And God said, I make man and woman in my image, and the first people were black. Well, then God is black, but then God's inside of you, and God's not this mystery God in the sky. I found that to be powerful. I found this idea of man, woman, child, family, the idea of culture and freedom and power, equality, all these things being fascinating to me. So that's the beginning of when I say the 5% is turned into 10%. One element of this is out of society, 85% are the deaf, dumb, and blind. They're the uncivilized. They're the people that are led by the other actions, directives, and leadership of other people. They're the quote unquote sheep. They're the regular people, theoretically. And so you don't want to be condescending. And it's not saying that the 85ers are somehow then inhuman, but you do want to recognize then that there are people leading that, and that's the 10%. The 10% have knowledge of what is and use that knowledge to take advantage of the 85. And then you have the 5%, which are the poor righteous teachers. And their goal is to civilize the 85 and also to battle the 10% that take advantage of the 85. So an element to me that I appreciated in the Gods and Earth's ideas was that the poor righteous teachers, you're not seeking money, you're not seeking material wealth, you're not seeking prosperity, you're not seeking the social status or some element of recognition. It's righteousness that you're seeking, and that righteousness is going to be dictated by what's important in community. But in adherence to this idea of knowledge, wisdom, understanding, the preservation of the black family, preservation of black culture. And I found that to be very inspiring and powerful. And when you look at the world around us, is it possible for it to seem as if the majority of people just follow what they're told? There are another group of people that say, we're not listening to the rules. We're going to make the rules, but we'll make the rules imbalanced and inequitable and to our favor. And then there's a small number of people that battle the people taking advantage of people and try not to take advantage of the majority of people. So it made sense to me. So in music, hip-hop's heavily influenced by the 5%ers. Rakim's a 5%er. Wu-Tang influenced by 5%ers. When you hear him say, yo, peace, God, that's 5%er lingo, right? And so when I was a teenager or before I even understood or made it to college, I've been influenced by the 5%ers. I get to college and I learn more about it. I'm around people who are practicing. I'm around people that do knowledge and they have their build sessions and I'm not really involved. I just hear, I'm sitting there in the back. But I started realizing how important it was in hip-hop culture. And some of the figures that I found to be most inspiring were 5%ers and talked about knowledge. They talked about the balance of good and evil, and they talked about the history of the black man. They talked about the history of the African diaspora, and they recognized the universal kind of Pan-African nature that's espoused in 5% ideology. And I loved it. Well, the problem is I was 18, 20, 24. They were 24, 28, 30. It was rap in the late 90s, early 2000s. Society was moving a certain way. there was an alignment between youth culture and rebellion and critical thinking that aligned. Well, some of those 5%ers have turned into the 10%. And they utilize their knowledge and awareness of how the world is and how entertainment is and how the human mind is and how emotions are moved by vibrations. And they take advantage of people. Their only goal now is to make money. Their only goal is self-aggrandizement. Their only goal is satiating this greed that's insufferable, actually. And it's unfortunate because now that I'm 46, so some of these people now are 50, 55, 60. They're the former 5%ers that now are the 10% talking crazy. And they're selling snake oil in the form of money. It's this idea of you got to beware the false prophets, and the people that don't take on the responsibility and what should be done if a person doesn't take the responsibility of civilizing and uncivilized, if they take advantage of people. And you see now that being lauded. You see all throughout hip hop and entertainment, some of the same people that were like, yo, authenticity is important, they selling fake shit. The same people that were like, yo, hip hop is a cultural product, you have to take it seriously. They're doing commercials for Walmart and companies that in no way help black people or in any way tied to hip hop. The same people that were talking about respect women, now 20, 30 years later, are acting like they the biggest bozo pimps in the world. I mean, it's just baffling to me how you have that change, but it also is in alignment with history. We saw it in the move from the 60s then to the 80s of what happened to all the hippies. All those folks out in California, out in Oregon, out in wherever they were that were pacifists, that were anti-capitalist, that were anti-war, that were anti the system, that wanted to grow their hair long, grow out a beard, not get a job, tune out, do LSD. Well, what happened 20, 30 years later? They become CEOs of companies. And now politically, they become more and more conservative and more in the vested interests of the moneyed class, the capitalists. And you see the same thing in hip hop. And it's just unfortunate because hip hop started differently. Like in my mind, and again, I'm not saying that the hippies weren't uber revolutionary, but I'm also, when I think of the black community, hippies weren't in my neighborhood. And so although they had a huge effect on American culture, the civil rights movement in the 60s, for me, had a much larger effect like in my community. So I didn't get a lot of influence from the hippie culture outside of movies and TV or music. But in my day-to-day life, my mom and family members weren't showing pictures of Woodstock. But I was heavily influenced by the 5%ers. And so it's shocking to me to see how some of the rappers or some of the social theorists that were so inspiring and invigorating in the late 90s and early 2000s are now just old black dudes saying really conservative stuff that makes it sound like they don't like women, makes it sound like they don't like queer people, makes it sound like they don't understand the science of transness. It makes it sound like all types of things I would never expect to hear. And especially the like sell your culture element is in direct opposition. Because I get a lot of conservative metaphysical or religious or spiritual beliefs end up being somewhat conservative towards patriarchy, somewhat conservative when it comes to sex and how pro-sex can you be, somewhat conservative when it comes to queerness. But the sell out blackness for money part is shocking to me. And the extent of how wildly incorrect and ignorant some of the statements that get made from people that like would have been heroes when I was younger. So I'm not going to name anyone specifically. My homie Wade asked me to, but I don't want to call out rappers. Like in real life, if you want to ask me who, I'll give you examples. But it's literally, you got to watch and wait long enough for your hero to become the villain. And I don't like seeing that, especially when it started with knowledge, wisdom, understanding, culture, freedom, power, equality, God, build. Born and cipher's complete, and I don't even know nothing. So I hope you enjoy your night.